Welcome to B'Madzaje Ginonindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. The Anishinaabeg Nation held its first Moose Mawandjading, a moose symposium, in Kitigan-Zibi, Garden River First Nation, last September. I was fortunate to attend the symposium and speak with several First Nation citizens who are actively involved with the moose. They shared their on-the-land experience with harvesting, Indigenous protocols, traditional knowledge, and Western research, as well as the important work of advocating for full access to our Aboriginal rights and responsibilities when it comes to harvesting moose on our traditional territories. In this episode, we'll hear from Curtis Avery, manager of the Nipissing First Nation Environment Department, who will share how they're conducting moose research in their territory. Curtis Avery is a citizen of Nipissing First Nation and grew up in Sudbury. Curtis had an early curiosity about how the natural world worked, yet saw firsthand how mining and smelting impacted the environment. He decided to pursue his interest in the relationship between nature and human activity and completed a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Biology and Technology at Nipissing University, as well as the Environmental Technology Certification at Canadore College. He joined the Anishinaabeg Ontario Fisheries Resource Centre, where he learned firsthand how First Nations research and monitor the health of their fisheries. As a fisheries biologist, Curtis kept busy doing environmental work and monitoring across Ontario, often for short-term projects. He realized that if he stayed in one region, he could develop a deeper understanding and connection to one ecosystem over time. Curtis decided to bring his experience back to his home territory. The Nipissing First Nation Environment Department is responsible for the sustainable management and protection of Nipissing First Nations land base, which spans over 30 kilometers along the northern shoreline of Lake Nipissing between the city of North Bay and the municipality of West Nipissing. A further administrative area extends several kilometers north of the reserve through the Pedley, Bocage, and Commanda townships. Nipissing First Nation also co-manages Lake Nipissing's fisheries and lake ecosystem with the Ministry of Natural Resources. Curtis will share how the Environment Department is using data collected through satellite imagery, remote sensors, a weather station, and trail cameras, as well as on-the-ground surveys, water sampling, and fecal pellet counts to assess the state of the moose population and the overall ecosystem in their territory.
It's a new department. I think of the Environment Department much like the mortar to, let's say, the cinder blocks in this room. When we're at the First Nation and we're dealing with resources, there's often a need to deal with the resource itself, whether that's managing the fisheries quota, dealing with commercial fishermen, that sort of heavier, bigger item. But there's a little bit more needed in terms of management, and that's the monitoring aspect. And that's kind of where we come in. So the Environment Department and the Resource Department often work very closely with each other. Yeah, and I always wanted to come back to my First Nation, and that was always a plan of mine. So I want to take everything I learned, bring it back to Nipissing First Nation, and sort of help the community out the best I could and give something back that was meaningful. And at the same time, develop a deeper understanding of what our system looks like and how that works. And most importantly, how we are impacting it. And it takes a long time to get the whole story, and so I'm happy to be here and still learning about it.
For sure. So tell me about the territory you're working in.
Yeah, so in Nipissing, a lot of the monitoring research that we're doing falls into this geometric thing we call it, the administrative boundaries, essentially. And the reason why we focus a lot of work there is because these are the areas where we can create laws. And in order to make sound decisions and create policies or protect things, we can only make those laws within that boundary. So when right now, considering I've been there for 4 years now, there's been a lot of knowledge acquired and data acquired because it's just never been done before. So in order to assist in managing those lands, we had to only acquire data within those boundaries. And we consider the lake also part of that because we co-manage the lake with the MNRF when it comes to the walleye fishery, which has been pretty beneficial. And we have our own fisheries law, and all in the hopes to help sustain our community now and for many generations, and provide some more stewardship initiatives to create a more resilient fishery, especially in the face of climate change. So our boundaries are more or less that administrative area, the lands that are of interest to Nipissing, where we can make those laws and use that data to make those laws. Regionally, because we have been successful in building up a UAV program, using LiDAR, surveying, and looking at species that don't care about our boundaries, we've been able to partner and work with other First Nations and start developing these relationships so that when we do have a concern, or if we do want to manage, at least we have some data, we've been doing it before, and we can look at it as a regional approach. And that's what I hope we get to someday, especially with moose, is working with these other First Nations in the region to, co-manage with other entities like the Crown to ensure that these populations and these important species are protected.
So I hear you are doing this moose research at Nipissing First Nation. So can you describe your research program?
Yeah, so a lot of our research around moose has been dealing with, okay, how do we identify trends in their population densities to determine if populations are increasing or decreasing? And in addition to that, what does climate have to do with these trends? So our first major funding initiative involved looking at moose and in climate scenarios to sort of gather the baseline data that we could use in the future. And that involved a weather tower that we will be installing at one of our outposts in the more northern boundaries of our administrative areas, heavily forested and filled with lots of moose, and just a great base area to base camp from. So we put in the weather tower up there, and then we're also conducting regular fecal pellet count indexing in the 3 townships that our administrative boundaries encompass. And we just completed last year all 3 of them, and now we're going to give it a rest for about a year or 2 before we go back and recount those areas. And that by that time, there should have been enough time passed that we can start seeing changes in those densities with our index that we get for those townships. And another part of that first wave of funding that we received from Moose was also to look at, on a very basic level, the ecological land classification of these forest communities and how that related to what we were seeing on the ground with moose. And although it is more of a desktop exercise at the moment in delineating these areas and coding them for different plant communities, we are actively going in and ground truthing these areas and refining them.
When you say desktop, do you mean like you're using satellite imagery to do your classification?
Yeah, so we used a lot of the newer imagery that the ministry uses. It's really high resolution, and with the help of a third party, we provide this data, and they can classify those plant communities down to basic category, like, for instance, coniferous forest or mixed forest or a bog or a fen. And just having those large areas delineated allows us to ground truth and then really identify the soil type and what that means and what kind of plant communities those are at a higher resolution that is more familiar with forestry management planning and stuff like that, so that we can make sound decisions when it comes to developing land or protecting areas that support certain species, whether it's species at risk. And it is quite the biologist's atlas in determining where do we need to look. We could have done this in-house. We had started to, but the size of our First Nation and the administrative boundaries is quite large. It's a very large chunk of land. It's almost most of the north shore of Lake Nipissing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're saying ground truth, then you mean people physically going out onto the land and cross-referencing what you saw in the satellite data. And
Yeah, so whenever we're out there doing other studies also, we try to go out and identify areas within those delineated polygons and identify what that polygon truly is in a higher resolution. And then we can apply that to the entire polygon. So we keep going in and filling in these polygons and classifying them to higher resolution or ecological codes.
wow, so you're saying you're getting this baseline data, but already with climate change, you'll be able to start to see changes in the land, really.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the important part of having some sort of baseline. With climate change, increasing the spread of invasive species, changing the composition of plant communities because of, increased temperature, growing seasons, drier areas. It really does have an impact on the land. And without having a reference, it's really hard to determine how things are being impacted and documenting that with some sort of accuracy. Yeah. In addition to some of the things that we've mentioned, we're also inventorying our tributaries that are part of these landforms and these watersheds. We conduct in-house our own Ontario Stream Assessment protocols. So these are sites that we're establishing in perpetual monitoring programs that we keep going back to these sites and identifying what's changed with those minnow species that occupy those tributaries and that site to be specific. In addition, we're also doing water sampling. We've done a lot of water sampling in our tributaries to identify what is the water quality baseline and help compare that to perhaps changes in different minerals. We're also doing a lot of other studies with Nipissing University. We just finished our third year of some legacy chloride research, looking at some of our tributaries that may be impacted by the Highway 17 corridor and the salting and de-icing agents that are spread there or have been for many, many, many years. And it's important because in addition to that, we also do spawning surveys for lake sturgeon and walleye in these little tributaries that kind of go unnoticed. But we've found, in the one tributary I'm referring to with the legacy chloride research we're doing, supports walleye in the spring going up the river and spawning. So it's part of the fishery. Some of our OSAPs, or Ontario Stream Assessment Protocols, have unearthed species at risk lamprey, which is also important to document. So it just goes to show that these systems are very important overall to not only the fishery, but they're the veins of the landforms that they're coming from.
You mentioned, you are doing the moose research. I'm assuming when you say fecal pellet count index, you're counting moose poop.
Yes.
So is that a recognized research method to be counting moose fecal pellets?
It is, and the protocols there's quite a bunch of methodologies on this type of counting or this indexing, but the protocol itself was kind of created in New Zealand, looking at other cervids like deer, and they were able to show that, I think they used like 20 deer yards or something like that, but they were able to show that there is a relationship between density and the fecal pellet counts. So, more density, more fecal pellets. So it was replicated for moose. It was tried out when I worked at the Anishinaabe Ontario Fisheries Resource Centre. They were trying to get into dealing with moose surveys at that time. Aerial surveys were pricey and often didn't align with the field season. So they piloted it out. It wasn't too successful, and we wonder if that's because of just logistics and the type of terrain perhaps that they were encountering. But I didn't let the idea die. After I left and came to Nipissing and seeing there was still a concern, I really wanted to try it myself. So we're glad it's successful, and it's a new tool in the toolbox when it comes to monitoring important staple species in our community and surrounding regions too.
Tell me about your findings with your moose research.
When we first started the protocol, I had my doubts that it was going to work because, it takes a lot of effort to get out there, Sometimes you're getting off of a quad and walking 2 kilometers in the bush. And how the protocol works is you basically run randomized sites in an area and identify a transect, a straight line that you have to follow with a bearing that you have to follow. And every 5 meters, you have to put a stake down, and then within that stake, in a 1 meter circumference, hope to find moose pellets. So, every 5 meters, you're doing that in a straight line, and it's not all the time that those pellets will land in a plot. So you could do many transects with a lot of effort and not have anything. In addition to that, you might go out of your way to complete a transect only to have finally see the moose pile with the pellets, but it's just being outside your plot that you can't count it. But sure enough, if you keep doing it over and over, you do end up with, sometimes we've had like 4 or 5 plots filled with pellets. And that really helps support your findings, and also a great indicator of important overwintering habitat. So at first we didn't think it was going to work, but after the pilot we seen it did work, and we just continued going on with it, and it was really great to be able to do something for the community and address people's concerns in having monitoring these moose. In terms of the things that we're hearing and seeing, there was a concern about the amount of deer that were mixing with the moose, and fears of parasites and meningeal brainworm, and that was never around before. And said, why is things changing now then? Why are these moose having these weird episodes of walking around and causing issues with traffic that need to be put down by the police because they could run into a car? Why is all this changing? And the explanation of the increase in deer populations and where they are. And sure enough, when we did our study, we were seeing deer exactly where the moose were, and they were occupying the same habitats, and those deer were being vectors for those diseases. And for what we believe and what we've seen and documented is that they are contributing to meningeal brainworm, and specifically in those areas where we're seeing it, and those deer are proliferating there and mixing with the moose. And the increase in deer also from the fact that our winters are becoming more mild, and that winter severity used to really limit deer to kind of where we are, but now the deer are moving more north. So if we extrapolate what we've seen in our studies at home, there is a fear that as the deer do move north, that other moose populations will experience the same impacts from parasites, such as the meningeal brainworm. And it's a concern, but it's also something that we need to keep studying and identifying what we can do to manage this issue.
And you mentioned so you did this over several seasons.
Yeah, 3 years in the spring. And the protocol is for when, right when the snow's off the forest floor to probably mid or end of April or mid-May, before the bugs come out. Every year, our last couple plots have been to deal with the black flies, but right before they start coming out. And it's great because you get out there, we're not only documenting the pellets, but we're also identifying all the moose signs that we're seeing, all the red maples that are trees that are pulled down, and where they've been rubbing, and incisor marks on the bark where they've been scraping off the bark. And it's really a good way to get out on the land and see it for yourself and identify other things. Like we've run into areas where there's a plethora of turtle species, and make note of it. And when we have species at risk work we need to do, we know where to go. In addition, identifying areas that you don't usually see, like these large areas of balsam that are just standing and dead because of the spruce budworm. You're walking through this forest that you're literally pushing aside, and it's falling down because it's standing dead wood that was really impacted by these budworms. And identifying there's issues here. That's a forest fire risk, and bringing all this up in our natural resource committee meetings and raising awareness of. So it's just a great way of our people to get out on the land and observe important aspects that you wouldn't necessarily see in your day-to-day life unless you were out there doing that. So,
as mentioned, this conversation with Curtis took place at the Anishinaabeg Nation Moose Symposium. A highlight of the gathering was the moose calling competition. Experienced harvesters showed off their skills in 3 categories: longest call, funniest call, and best call. Some of the calls were specific to moose behavior, such as a cow calling their calf or interactions between cows and bulls.
Who would like to come up first of all and be the first contestant? No microphone, just longest call category. Somebody else for longest call category. Stitch.
No. I'll let the Southerners.
You go, I'll go.
No.
And there you go. We got one here. Another one.
You have to show your scores after too. Like turn your boards around. So, 10, 8, 9. Grant, what do you got there?
Okay. Now the score for the second one.
9. You got it. 7. And I can't.
7.
John Paul, what do you got? 7.
7.
All right.
Okay. Let's have another contestant for longest call. Eight. Ooh, good ones there. Good ones. Anybody else for the longest call? Eight, 9, 10, 6. Okay. Funniest call, man.
Oh.
Okay.
They might dance. And all of them use call all the time on the speaker. Okay, so I asked them.
That was the come on dance.
bulls because they kept coming in even after we shot. We were talking. Didn't scare them. So out of nowhere, I just called out, "Yeah, bossy. Sure enough, bull comes out of the tree line, comes running right at us. I'm like, no, that's not what I was meant to do. I shoo him off. Anyways, the moosey does work. Good one.
9, 8, 5, 8. Okay. Now, this is the top category here. The best moose call. You can do either a cow call or a bull call. And having been in the bush, every bull sounds different. So we'll go for the best call.
Okay, I'll do a cow that's encouraging her bull to skate.
Somewhere.
8.5. 9.8 again. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, time for talent.
Congratulations to the winners. David Trudeau in the longest call category, Greg Solomon for the funniest call, and Tom Asinaway for best call. Are there any other moose-related initiatives happening in Nipissing First Nation?
Another initiative that we're working on is the pilot program looking at daisy chaining or connecting a series of trail cameras together to inventory and monitor species in certain areas. And typically we leave these in for a sensitive area where we've seen and reported on a lot of moose activity, and just get a characteristic of what the diversity of species in that area looks like, and what are they cohabitating with. And in addition, what do the moose look like when we're capturing them on these trail cams? Are they being impacted by tick? Do they look healthy? Or how many calves are we seeing per cow? So all of this data contributes also to the moose. A lot of the trail camera stuff that we're working on we call it a multiple species inventory and monitoring program, but albeit for short term. So we'll only leave them in 1 year, 4 seasons. And we've done that for the Jocko Point, Brays Beach Complex, the Commanda, and Bocage townships. This year, with the introduction of our new base camp, we're going to be leaving these cameras out for a very long time to really monitor and inventory those species in those areas. Yeah, and so that contributes a lot to the knowledge on the moose. The other thing is, when moose do get dispatched because they are suspected of meningeal brainworm, we assist with getting samples of that moose to get tested for those parasites too. So we also do that sort of work to understand a little bit more about what's happening to those populations in our area.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned some of your findings from your moose study. What are the next steps you're hoping can happen?
So we're hoping to use this data to leverage changes that we'd like to see, but to use what we've currently got as a baseline to identify where these overwintering habitats are, what does the density or the index look like, and what will that look like when we do it again and again. And when we have this long-term data set, we'll be able to identify, is the population increasing or decreasing, and why might that be? And we can't do that without some sort of reference. And that's why it's important to start doing this now. And we're happy to have completed it, but this protocol will be conducted again in the future to help identify those changes in population trends. And again, because the sites are also randomized, we're constantly going to new locations. And I imagine by the time we've been in those townships 3 times, we would have built up a map of some very crucial overwintering habitat that we may have to protect. Like in nursery areas, for instance, there's many times where we go out and we'd see lots of moose and signs of calves. We even came upon a calf that had been born, and the mom was in the bush, and the calf was just in this little moss bowl and just looking at us, and we stayed away. We didn't want to get the mom too riled up and after us, but you run into those things and you realize that these areas of the land are important to these species, and had we not been out there, had we not been collecting the data, we wouldn't know that. And you need to know that if you're trying to protect and manage a species, for sure. Yeah. I would love to collaborate with other First Nations, however, and do some larger surveys, aerial surveys for regional management when and if we get there. Then there's other groups that we're associated with and projects that are supporting these big regional groupings of First Nations and coming together on moose. This symposium being one of them. But yeah, things are changing, and I hope we get to a point where we can really collaborate regionally and outside of these areas and work with the Crown to co-manage regionally moose populations.
I guess in closing, so what's your sense of how you feel about attending this moose symposium? How has it been?
I think it's really great to not only get the First Nations here, but also to get members of the MNRF out here was great, because although there were some passionate moments, people need to hear things sometimes, and sometimes we need to come together in order for these for these ideas to be passed around and massaged and concerns to be pooled and raised, and it's a crucial time to be doing so, especially in our regions when we're dealing with issues with moose populations and aerial spraying and jurisdiction of other groups in our territories that pose a threat to our staple food items. So sometimes it's important to get everybody together and for them to be on the same page and understand together so that we can address our concerns collaboratively and together rather than in silos. So these kind of events are really important. And I'm glad to be here, and I'll be at the next one.
Excellent. Well, Miigwech Curtis Avery for joining us on the podcast.
Miigwech and Bamapi.
Bamapi. Miigwech to Curtis Avery for taking part in the podcast, and to the Anishinaabeg Nation's Land and Resources Department for supporting this episode. To learn more about the Nipissing First Nation Environment Department and their other land and water-based projects, find the link in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Brothers by Wolf Saga and Chippewa Travelers and For Eddie by Don Ross, licensed by Nagamo Publishing. Miigwech for listening to Bamadzajig Ginonindwa. Until next time, Bamapi.